EWA Radio, the official podcast of the Education Writers Association, and I'm public editor Emily Richmond. U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos is now one of President Trump's longest-serving cabinet members, a noteworthy and arguably somewhat surprising milestone. We're going to take a look at what's on her policy agenda, where that differs from the priorities of the now Democrat-controlled House, and what reporters should be watching for on the federal education policy front. Joining us to tackle all of this are two expert reporters, Alyson Klein of Education Week. Welcome back, Alyson.
Thanks for having me.
And Emily Wilkins of Bloomberg Government, making her very first EWA radio appearance. Emily, welcome.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
All right, so we've got K-12, we've got higher ed. I'm not going to play favorites. I am going to toss a coin. Emily is the visitor to this playing field, so I'm going to let her call it. Ready?
All right.
Go.
Heads.
It is tails. Tails. Statistically unlikely, but it is tails. Alyson, we're going to start with you. As I mentioned, Betsy DeVos is one of the longest-serving cabinet members for President Trump. Is anyone surprised she's still there?
I think a lot of people are a bit surprised that she's still there because she's had a pretty rocky go of it. I mean, just about a year ago, she had that really tough interview with 60 Minutes. And I mean, who can forget her confirmation hearing? But she did say to me in an interview in, I think, the fall of 2017 that she plans on sticking it out for 4 years. And it seems like she's going to stick with that.
And you get the sense, though, don't you, that maybe she's growing into the job or at least enjoying it a little more?
I can't really tell if she's growing into it or enjoying it a little more, but I do think that she really believes that she can make a difference for kids on school choice. I mean, whether or not educators and the public believe that, is an open question. But I get the sense from her in speaking to her that she's doing this job because she believes she can make a difference.
So in edu-speak, is she gritty?
I think she is gritty. She's gritty, she's flinty, pick your funny adjective. I'm betting that she's going to stick it out for the 4 years.
One of the criticisms of her early on was that she did not have much experience in the public school realm. Is that changing? Is she visiting more campuses? How is she spending her time?
She does not appear to be visiting more campuses than she was at the beginning of her tenure. In fact, I think she's visiting fewer campuses, at least judging from her public schedule. She hasn't done kind of a big sweep in schools since her back-to-school tour last fall, although she's had a couple visits here and there. And lately, she's actually wheelchair-bound. She had a bicycle accident back in December, and I'm assuming that might be inhibiting things a bit, but I don't get the sense that she's spending more time in public schools, no.
Arguably, one of the biggest issues for public schools this past year has been school safety following some tragic and, of course, well-known school shooting incidents. That sparked the School Safety Commission. It is headed up by 4 cabinet members, including Betsy DeVos. Where does that work stand right now, Alyson?
So they put out their final report in December, and there weren't any big surprises in that. Probably the centerpiece of the report, certainly the lead of most of our stories, was that it recommended getting rid of the Obama administration's 2014 guidance on school discipline. And that guidance basically put schools on notice that they could be found in violation of federal civil rights laws if they enforce intentionally discriminatory rules, or actually even if their policies lead to disproportionately higher rates of discipline for students of color or students in special education, even if those policies weren't necessarily written with some sort of a discriminatory intent. So it really forced some conversations and some action in schools. Some folks say that it went a bit too far and had schools doing things like discipline quotas, that sort of thing. But either way, that was the centerpiece of the report, was getting rid of this discipline guidance. And the civil rights community, pushed back on that really hard. And they said, what does this discipline guidance really have to do with school shootings? I mean, there was a very tangential connection to Parkland in that the Parkland shooter was referred to that program. It's unclear whether or not he actually ever participated, but, getting rid of the guidance happened, and we'll see if school districts decide to sort of stick with the changes that they've made in response to it. The other major thing the report did, I'll just say briefly, was it encouraged schools to consider arming certain school staff, which could include, educators with some sort of background in firearms.
One of the big pushes for Betsy DeVos has been scaling back Obama-era guidance and recommendations where people felt that there was overreach. One aspect of that was built into the Every Student Succeeds Act, which were put in place by members of Congress, again, who thought folks like Arne Duncan had just gone too far. Are there things that Betsy DeVos might want to do that she can't do?
She would say no, that there aren't things that she's been interested in having states do, that she doesn't want to be giving them guidance. She wants to write dear parent letters, not dear colleague letters. However, last year, she was really critical of states' ESSA plan and kind of pushed them to go further. But again, she did that while approving every single state's ESSA plan, including some plans that the civil rights community felt like violated the law. So she's kind of using her, I guess, the bully pulpit of her office to tell states that she doesn't think they're doing a good job, but at the same time, not using like the power or the stick of her office to not approve their plan that she doesn't think going far enough for students.
Emily Wilkins, I want to turn to you for a moment. Betsy DeVos's sphere of influence is certainly more in the K-12 world, but I'm interested, where has she been leaving her fingerprints on the higher ed side?
So last year in December, Betsy DeVos, as well as Diane Jones, who is the principal deputy undersecretary, had a big meeting with a lot of college leaders, other higher education groups, and they basically laid out this idea for an upcoming regulation that would focus a lot on giving colleges as well as college accreditors more flexibility. And the idea behind this is they want to see colleges do more. The keyword that they will always use is innovation. And basically what that means is that they want to roll back a number of regulations, many from the Obama era, that they think limit schools and students in when they offer classes and how they offer classes.
And you mentioned Diane Jones, and obviously she's somebody with a wealth of experience in the higher education sector. And it seems like Betsy DeVos leans pretty heavily on her.
Yeah, I would say that with the regulations, when everyone met up for the first session, it was Diane Jones who kicked it off. She's the one who had the background at Princeton University. She's worked at community colleges. She's worked with for-profit colleges. She's really been the one who sort of has this background within the higher education world. And at least from my time in Washington, she seems to be sort of the go-to person when it comes to these detailed, policy-oriented higher education questions.
Well, one of the higher education questions, of course, is how institutions should be investigating, reporting, tracking incidents of campus sexual assault. And the Obama-era guidance on Title IX was pretty specific about those expectations, and DeVos has done some rolling back there. But she's also, as you've reported, talked about raising the bar for what kind of incidents might qualify for an investigation. And interestingly, she's also added a cross-examination provision. Tell us how that would work.
So the cross-examination provision would basically allow the student who brought forward the accusation of being sexually assaulted and the student who was being accused. And it would put them in a situation where basically they could do a cross-examination of each other. Obviously, the concern is that this would be fairly traumatic. If you were raped by someone and are suddenly being put in the same room as them and facing questions from them, that can be a very uncomfortable, very bad situation. And so what the regulation has proposed is that the accuser and the accused can be in two separate rooms, connected through an audio and a video feed. And it's also suggested that there could be cases where it wouldn't be the two students who are asking questions of each other. It could be someone that the students had designated to be the person to ask questions, or even someone that the college had designated as a third party.
Emily, has Betsy DeVos surprised anyone with any of her positions on higher education issues?
I don't really think so. I think a lot of what DeVos has done is what a lot of people might have expected any Republican administration to do. Many of the things that she's rolled back or that she's considering, perhaps not rolling back, but rewriting, have been things that Republican senators and lawmakers have been criticizing basically since the Obama administration put them in place to begin with. She has been very much in step with what the greater Republican Party's sentiment on many of these regulations has been.
We're talking with Alyson Klein of Education Week and Emily Wilkins of Bloomberg Government about Betsy DeVos, Education Secretary, who's now starting her third year in office, as well as federal education issues. Don't miss an episode of EWA Radio. You never have to. You can find us on your favorite podcast app. And thank you for taking a moment to rate us on iTunes. Your support and feedback are helping us grow. Congress now has a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, and the House Committee on Workforce and Education has a new chairman. Alyson, tell us about Bobby Scott of Virginia. What are some of his priorities on the policy front?
Bobby Scott was one of the chief architects of the Every Student Succeeds Act, better known as ESSA. He has a background as a civil rights lawyer, but he's a guy who really also likes to get things done. And he has a really good relationship with his Republican counterpart, Virginia Foxx. He's worked well with Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Patty Murray in the Senate. He's a guy who likes to pass stuff, and I think that's something he's certainly going to try to do, even in this very partisan environment.
What are his priorities in terms of policy, programs, funding?
So his first one out of the gate is actually an infrastructure bill that would give about $100 billion, $70 billion in direct funding and $30 billion in tax credit funds to help rebuild schools across the country.
And that has some implications for higher ed as well, doesn't it, Emily?
It could potentially. I think most people are viewing the infrastructure bill as primarily one that's focused on K through 12 schools. That's usually where the government, actually gives money to schools, because in higher education, it's not so much the government giving money to schools, but giving money to students.
I'm curious, though, in terms of getting that passed, how big a deal is it that Lamar Alexander, former education secretary, Republican of Tennessee, is retiring? I mean, certainly with him on the committee, there's been a strong spirit of bipartisanship in passing legislation. Emily, do you see that as a factor at all?
For the infrastructure legislation, that might be interesting to see. I'm actually still interested at this point to see whether or not Democrats will include school funding in their larger infrastructure bill. Right now, we've seen Scott come out with his own bill, but I'm interested, from my understanding, there's one that's being worked on by Democratic leadership, and I'm interested to see if that one will contain school funding, simply because school funding tends to be a little bit less of a bipartisan issue than, say, infrastructure funding for roads and bridges.
So, as we all know, the Every Student Succeed Act replaced No Child Left Behind. That was a hard-fought and very late legislative battle. It was about 8 years overdue. And now the Higher Education Act is due for renewal. In fact, it's approaching the 7-year mark. Is this the year that it's going to happen, Emily?
That is the million-dollar question. A lot of people are very skeptical that it will be reauthorized this year, simply because there's a long way to go. We don't have language yet out of the Senate. Senator Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray want to do a bipartisan bill. There are some issues that there's a lot of bipartisan support on. There are other ones like campus sexual assault, and in some cases, college affordability, where the two parties are in very different places. And so they have a lot of work to do to be able to form one comprehensive bill. I would say the biggest argument, though, that we will see a Higher Education Act passed this year or early next year is that Senator Lamar Alexander, this is his last shot. He'll be retiring after 2020. And there's really no Republican in the Senate that has his resume on education. Former education secretary, president of colleges. This is his big goal. This could be his landmark piece of legislation. And he certainly has the clout to get it done. He has the ability to work in a bipartisan manner to get it done. The only problem is that it is a big, big lift.
Emily, another issue for Betsy DeVos' administration has been what the federal government's role should be in overseeing things like college accreditation or student loan debt, consumer protections. Where has the biggest movement been?
Chairman Scott has said that accountability and oversight of the Education Department are going to be huge parts of his work with the committee this upcoming year. He hasn't said it yet what members of the Education Department we might see coming up to Capitol Hill. Right now, his office is in the stage of trying to send letters to the Education Department officials and seeing what information they can get that way. One interesting thing to note is that we might not necessarily see Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Scott has indicated that he's interested in talking with people about college accreditation, interested in student loan servicing, and interested in perhaps talking to people like Principal Deputy Undersecretary Diane Jones or Dr. Awe Johnson, who's currently running the Next Gen program.
And what is Next Gen?
Next Gen is basically the department's idea of revamping how students interact with their loan servicers. Scott wants to make sure that when students are going to college, they are paying for a worthwhile and quality education. He's certainly not alone. I think that's the goal of many on the Hill. Definitely, I think there are many people who realize that consumer protection and higher education do have ties to each other.
There were very few education buzzwords in the State of the Union, but there was a big one, and it was for Betsy DeVos, and that was school choice. It made it in. Alyson, what should we attach to that? And it wasn't really clear what President Trump was pledging, was it?
No, we have actually no idea what he meant by past school choice. So far, even a Republican-controlled Congress has not been very interested in doing anything on school choice. There was a couple pitches for some competitive grant programs that would have included a voucher component. Congress wasn't interested in that. So far, Congress has been uninterested in vouchers or education savings accounts for military-connected kids. I guess two possibilities. One would be that he's interested in having Congress reauthorize and maybe even expand the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, which really only affects kids in the District of Columbia. But Betsy DeVos recently said she'd like to see that, expanded and reauthorized. It's up this year. And then another possibility would be more funding for charter schools, which is something we already saw under both this administration and the Obama administration. Other than that, I'm not really sure what they're talking about, but maybe we'll see more details soon.
Emily, is it too soon to start talking about what you're watching for 2020 in terms of some presidential candidates? I mean, certainly some of them have talked publicly about their concerns about accountability in higher education and the role that plays in driving the nation's economic engine.
It is certainly not too early to start talking about 2020. It's very much underway in Washington, D.C. Definitely a big thing to be looking at, that I'll be looking at, is what Democrats come out with a message on in terms of, do they want free college? Is it tuition-free college? Is it debt-free college? And I think there's another element as far as school choice. Cory Booker is a big fan of charter schools, and at one point he and Betsy DeVos were sort of seen as allies in a certain sense. And so it will be interesting to see if any of the Democrats running do embrace a bit more of a school choice platform than we've seen previously.
Alyson, I mean, keeping in mind that federal education policy can be at 30,000 feet and may not be directly related to what's happening on the ground for schools, what should local reporters be paying attention to on the landscape right now?
I think one thing to watch is the rollout of the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's in every state now, and states are going to have to begin thinking about how they turn around their lowest performing schools. And they have all sorts of new leeway in this law to do that. So I think that's definitely a story to watch.
And Emily, what's your advice?
One of the stories that I think might be particularly interesting for local reporters to look at when it comes to allegations of campus sexual assault, there has been a trend of students who were accused of sexual assault but then found not guilty suing the school because of action that the school took to the student, either expulsions, suspensions, before it was determined whether or not the student was responsible for that particular allegation. It'd be a little bit of a controversial story to do, but it sort of shows the other side from many of the very well done reporting of students who are victims of sexual assault, seeking help from the college and seeking a proper response.
Alyson Klein is one half of the Politics K-12 blog at Education Week. Alyson, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
And Emily Wilkins covers federal education policy for Bloomberg Government. Emily, it was great to have you.
This was great, Emily. Thank you so much.
And that wraps up another episode for us. If there's a story you want to know more about, drop us a line. We're at radio@ewa.org. The mission of the Education Writers Association is to strengthen the community of education journalists and improve the quality of education coverage. For more than 70 years, EWA has helped reporters get the story right. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.